I welcome everybody that's here today. I'm Barbara Klein. I'm the president of the League of Women Voters of Arizona. And I do want to mention a couple thank yous this morning. I want to thank the Goldwater Institute for giving us such a wonderful room to meet in. I'd like to thank Fair and Equal for their organization of this event. And our sponsors are Fair Vote Arizona, the League of Women Voters of Arizona, Arizona Advocacy Network, the Libertarian Party of Arizona, the Green Party of Arizona, Save Our Vote Arizona, which I'd also like to thank for the wonderful No on 121 signs around, and Stop Top 2. So I would make sure that everybody at least once in a while tells them thank you. And I'd also like to introduce somebody special in our audience this morning, and that's Judge Jim Gray, who's the Libertarian Vice President candidate with Gary Johnson. Okay, the League of Women Voters is a grassroots organization of women and men and believes in building better government through citizen education and advocacy. We have two separate arms, one for education and one for advocacy. And regarding our education arm, I'd like to mention that there are voter guides in the room for you this morning that are on all the ballot propositions, but they don't give our opinion because they're the education arm. But the League never supports or opposes a party or a candidate, but we are politically active in that we advocate for or against issues that we have long-term study on. Today's event is strictly from our advocacy arm in opposing Top 2. On the Save Our Vote website, there's a very important sentence, I think. While we come from a variety of backgrounds and political views, we are united around one basic principle. The Top 2 initiative hurts Arizona voters and must be stopped. Not only are the views and backgrounds different of our panelists today and the opposing groups, we do not even share all the same reasons that we oppose the measure, but we do all oppose the measure. That being said, we expect everyone today, panelists or audience, supporters and opponents, to remember that we can have civil discourse while sharing diversely opposite views, and I appreciate that civility, as I know all your neighbors do as well. With us on the panel today, sitting from your left to right, are Barry Hess, Luis Harita, Michael Liberti, Angel Torres, and Christina Tobin. I will ask them to introduce themselves to you in more detail in just a moment. Our format today is going to consist of statements from the panelists, 2 or 3 minutes, questions posed to the panelist by the facilitator, which means me, and is open discussion among the panelists, and open questions from the audience. And that means not grandstanding speeches, but just questions, and there will be a time limit on that. And so we're going to the statements. The League of Women Voters opposes Top 2 for several reasons. The two major ones being that we believe it disenfranchises voices and choices of voters for the general election. And secondly, because a system like ranked choice voting would be a much better solution and fairer to all involved. I would like each of the panelists in their opening statement to explain what their major reason or reasons are for their opposition. And we will start with Christina this time.
Great. Let me make sure the mic here works.
And tell us something about yourself as well.
Sure, in about 2 minutes, you said? Briefly. Hi, my name is Christina Tobin. I'm the founder and chair of the Free and Equal Elections Foundation. I am also the head of StopTop2.org. We led the efforts in California in 2010 to try to stop Top 2 Prop 14, We came close to defeating it, our $10,000 up against $5 million and corporate money and all tied to Charles Munger and Warren Buffett and so on. We'll get into more detail with that. I'm an election reform activist. I'm here to unite, create the grassroots movement to unite leaders across the spectrum to reform the electoral system throughout the United States. So stopping Top 2 is, of course, our highest priority right now, since it is the biggest threat to our electoral process throughout the United States. And I feel humbled and honored to be here today. Thank you, Barbara, and all these wonderful speakers across the spectrum standing up for what is right for we the people of the United States of America. Thank you.
Angel?
Good morning. My name is Angel Torres. I am the state co-chair of the Arizona Green Party. I'm also a candidate for state representative in Legislative District 27. I've worked in the airline industry for 25 years. I'm a member of and shop steward for Teamsters Local 104. The Arizona Green Party, we strongly recommend a no vote on Proposition 121. We have partisan primaries here in Arizona so that party members may elect candidates they believe will best represent their interests and values in the general election. And Arizona's open primary law already allows registered independents and party not designated voters to vote in the partisan primary election of their choice. The one exception being the Libertarian Party, which has a closed primary. The majority of legislative districts here in Arizona, 28 out of 30, and the majority of congressional districts, 8 out of 9, are either majority Democrat or majority Republican. In those majority districts, the top 2 candidates moving on to the general election could be from the same political party. Alternative parties and their candidates, such as the Americans Elect, Constitution, Green and Libertarian, and independent candidates, would essentially be eliminated from the general election. Historically, voter turnout is generally higher in the general election than in the primaries. Yet this initiative reduces the choices that voters have in the general election to only the top 2. This initiative will not save taxpayer dollars, since there will still be a primary election, and this initiative cannot guarantee that only moderate candidates will move on to the general election. Similar laws already exist in California, Louisiana, and Washington state, with no evidence of a moderating influence. Arizona voters deserve more choices and more options during the general election, not fewer. Please vote no on Proposition 121. Thank you.
Thank you. Michael?
Good morning, everybody. My name is Michael Liberti. I'm an attorney here in Phoenix. A little bit about myself. I practice commercial litigation and election law, political litigation. I was one of the lawyers who was involved in the Top 2 challenge over the summer. We challenged it under the Arizona Separate Amendment Rule, and also that the signatures that were gathered by petition circulators were gathered by people who were ineligible to vote for various reasons, who failed to put their correct information on the circulator affidavit, and a number of different things. We had very high hopes going into the litigation because the initiative that's being proposed is essentially an amalgamation of many different ideas and many different features that the Separate Amendment Rule of the Constitution is really designed to protect. In fact, this same initiative was attempted in 1998. It failed to make the ballot for various reasons. But in 1998, it was just limited to a Top 2 proposal. Here, they have so many different things: equal rights of candidates, allowing the voter registration list to be accessed by anybody, defunding political parties. So going into this, and based on the legal precedent, it looked like there was going to be a good chance to overturn it. And in fact, the Superior Court agreed with us and enjoined the initiative from the ballot. What ended up happening was the Supreme Court, for reasons that we don't know yet, because it takes a while for them to write the opinions, but they issue their order in order to impact the election process. So for reasons we don't know yet, they've allowed it to go to the ballot. And one can only speculate here as to why that's the reason, so I won't. We'll just have to wait and see. So I'll just end that thought by saying, if there was, in my opinion, as an attorney who's done 5 separate amendment rule challenges, if anyone should have gone down, this one should have. The courts have said in past cases that it's their responsibility to act as gatekeepers, to protect the voters and to protect our Constitution. Yet, for some reason, this initiative is going to the ballot. So we'll just have to wait and see why. The reason why I'm opposed to top 2 is basically because of the law of unintended consequences. Initiatives have a long history in Arizona. Some have been very good, some have been not so good. The process of drafting an initiative is very different than doing it in the legislature. When you draft a law in the legislature, it's required to be done in public. All stakeholders are required to come together and sit at the table and hammer out a proposal. It's supposed to go through public hearings in the House and in the Senate, in committee. It's supposed to be debated on the floor of the House, debated on the floor of the Senate. And then it's supposed to go to the governor, where the governor could exercise her veto authority. Then even after that in Arizona, under most circumstances, the legislation could be subject to referendum, where the people could take out petitions and force that legislation on the ballot for an up or down vote. In the initiative, none of that occurs. In the initiative process, you have folks who are interested in the legislation, either financially or what have you, sit down in a room, usually with a lawyer or a PR consultant behind closed doors, and you draft the initiative in a manner that you like it. And maybe by putting in a few little clauses that you think the voters might like and entice them to vote for it, which will kind of push you over the 50% top. That's what's been done here with top 2, is there are a lot of stakeholders who weren't invited to the table, a lot of folks who are shut out of the process, and what you have is this initiative that is riddled with problems that will wreak havoc on Arizona's election system. The one thing that we're going to talk a lot about today, I'm sure, is that it will not result in more moderate candidates. The supporters have no data, and this has been going on for several months. They have no data that shows that this system will lead to more moderate candidates. In fact, the opposite is true. Public Policy Institute of California, which is a think tank in the state of California, just recently released a study showing that top 2 essentially benefits 2 groups. Number 1 is incumbents, where they have that critical mass of support. Think about it this way. All I need is to have a plurality in order to get me past the post in the primary. That plurality could be 51%, that plurality could be 21%. All I need is that plurality to get me past the primary election. Incumbents have that advantage. They've been in office, people know them, they have the funding and the resources to solidify a core group of constituents to vote for them. The second group of people who will benefit is political consulting firms, and maybe lawyers. So maybe I'm talking against my own interests here, but I think democracy really prevails. The folks who will benefit, who also benefit are political consultants. And I have some data, according to that study. In 2010, the average cost of a U.S. House race in the state of California was $234,000. In 2012, under top 2, the cost was $333,000. For state senate in 2010, the average cost of a state senate race in California, $254,000. In 2012, the average cost $325,000. And that's just in the primary. Essentially what top 2 does is it creates 2 primary elections in Arizona. It will create the primary election in August, and then it will create a second primary or a new general in November, where the same candidates are going to have to square off against each other. Imagine rerunning the Schweikert-Quayle race or rerunning the Shapira-Sinema race. That is going to cost so much more money. So those are just a few of the reasons. I'll pass the microphone
Thank you, Michael. If you have any other further statements, I'll give you time later.
Okay,
too.
thanks, Barbara. I'm sorry.
Luis?
Lawyers tend to talk more.
Good morning. My name is Luis Heredia. I'm the executive director of the Arizona Democratic Party, and it's a pretty rare event for me to be standing at the Goldwater Institute at this moment. But I decided to do so because of the reason that we have to make a statement, and that that this proposition it does not serve the best interest of Arizona. And I'm a strong believer of how Arizona was drafted when the Arizona Constitution put in place direct democracy with the initiative, and it's a very strong component of our history. It was the ability to give citizens, average citizens, good intended citizens, the ability to craft legislation. To craft when the legislature was not working for the people, that it was direct democracy of good intended people getting together and drafting language. The problem that we are facing today, and the Prop 121 is a prime example of this, it is drafting ballot language by polling. And so they look at language that, let's bash on the political parties because it's popular, and we're going to be able to beat this and actually win this initiative. Let's draft it because we have this statement, and it actually gets us 2 percentage points more. Let's draft it because we have a certain set of languages or the sentences are placed in a way, and you're able to receive X percentage points. And so it matters, and it's such a perverse situation that we are facing that it matters more critical thinking, in my opinion. I'm still a believer of initiatives and well-intended individuals getting together and drafting language that benefits the future of the state. But this calls for attention and more critical thinking. Let me just share a little. I began my involvement in the Democratic Party as a 16-year-old walking into a Democratic Party office, picking up a list to get out more people to vote in Yuma County. My family was not a political family, first-generation immigrant family into this country. We learned the ethic of and work ethic of just working hard, and I got to know really great people by being involved in a political party. You know, it's not easy, but you know, one of the strongest arguments and debates are within our political party. But that's what makes strong organizations, if you're able to actually talk and debate about the issues that matter most. And so rising and working myself to being involved in this position as the executive director, I mean, it has not been an easy road, but it's also been one that I understand that the party provides a role of checks and balances to our state and how public policy is actually moved forward. I do believe the elections have the ultimate ability to change the direction of our state. So that's why I'm very passionate, and that's why I have a role here. But the other issue that I have with the elimination and what this ballot initiative intends to do is weaken political parties or weaken people, the ability to actually have a direct role in elections at the very grassroots level. It will shift the power to money and special interests. I only have to cite in 2010, the choices in Attorney General, I mean, Arizona would have been left with choosing between the disbarred Andrew Thomas or the almost indicted Attorney General Tom Horne. Those would have been the choices that Arizona voters would have had in the general election of 2010, because Felicia Rodolini, David Lujan, and Vince Rabago divided up the vote to the point that we would have eliminated the ability to move forward on the ballot, and that has consequences. Let me just share the practical reason of why this will also limit choices. The Democratic Party in this state will have to convince candidates running statewide to only limit one candidate to run. If not, we will be again dividing up our base vote in a way that will limit choices. If we have more than 2 candidates, we will then be facing a elimination process, and we could actually look at not having anybody at a statewide ballot, and that is, again, will limit our choice, but it also will shift the conversation, which should be held at the ballot box, to trying to persuade and coerce candidates to not choose to running. And it's already a difficult job to doing it right now. So we have to be practical about how we look at election reform. In the practical sense of this, if this passes, I want to say that the next legislative session will be forced to pass what is 100 years of election law in one legislative session. They would have to create some sort of an ability to pass legislation that will be in place for 2014. We'll have to go through pre-clearance, and we'll have to go through a series of steps to actually enact what this, and Michael alluded to the unintended consequences. So just on the practical sense. The other thing is that—
Wait a minute, Luis, can you hold that other thought for
Yes.
another time? Okay, thank you. Barry?
My name is Barry Hess, and I am the Communications Director for the Libertarian Party. I've formerly been a candidate for governor and look forward to being again. But I wanted to thank everybody who showed up here today for pushing past what it is you push past to be here. It's important to care, and as we all do. I did want to say a couple of things to the sponsors. Thank you very much for putting this all together, Barbara and the gals. And, it's just a forum so we can talk. But ever since Jan Brewer, as Secretary of State, asked me to sit upon the HAVA committee, the Help Americans Vote Act, a federal elections thing for electronic voting, I became really interested in the voting process, the bulwark, the very foundation of all that is our democracy, is the consistency and the integrity of our elections. And that is what is at stake here. It's nothing less. You know, it's funny because as Louis and Mike were talking about the unintended consequences, and that is one of the real scary things. I mean, I just keep hearing echoes of Nancy Pelosi saying, we'll just have to pass it to see what's in it. That kind of nonsense that we saw on that bill, which was also filled with egregious surprises. I think that we really should be asking our question after having spoken with the principals in all of this whole initiative. I was surprised because at first it started out they wanted to get rid of the extremists. I kind of pride myself on being an extremist. And I thought that was kind of odd because nothing good ever comes from the middle. We all know that, so you wouldn't even want to get rid of the extremists. And when you think about government as the proponent for your rights, your liberty, and your property, who other than an extremist would you want protecting those rights? I wouldn't want a half-stepper or some moderate playing with my rights, would you? And I think that the citizens really have to consider this. But when we look at this initiative ices out every opposition. We will not have elections if this goes through. We will only have auctions. And I'll continue on. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Since this is not a candidates debate and just a time to get our points across, if you don't feel that you want to answer any of the questions, feel free to skip over them. But this is the first one. If you have not already addressed this in your statement, please weigh in on the issue of independent voters. Even some of those opposing today believe that independent voters in Arizona are not given a fair shot, especially to ballot access. Can you address that in terms of top two or other ideas that you have? And we don't necessarily have to go in order because everybody may not wish to weigh in, but anybody like to address that?
Can you make the question a little more clear?
I'll go.
Go ahead, Angel.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and address the question. Well, you know, Arizona's, as I stated earlier, Arizona's open primary law already allows independent voters and party not designated voters and voters that do not belong to a ballot qualified party to vote in the primary election of their choice, the one exception being the Libertarian Party, which has a closed primary. As the Green Party, we actually encourage independents and party not designated voters to vote in our primary election, even though we usually don't have any candidates on the ballot for them to vote for. But also the nomination signature requirement for independent candidates needs to be amended by the state legislature. Currently, the nomination signature requirement for an independent statewide candidate is 3%, whereas the same signature requirement for a candidate from the Democratic, Libertarian, or Republican Party is only 1/2 of 1%. Same thing for candidates for the state legislature. The nomination signature requirement for an independent legislative candidate is 3%, whereas the same signature requirement is only 1% for a legislative candidate from the Democrats, Libertarians, or Republican Party. This initiative, Proposition 121, does nothing to address this issue. Proposition 121 actually makes it more difficult for alternative party candidates and independents to get on the ballot. So, I mean, as far as the issue of independent voters and party not designated voters, this initiative is of no benefit to them.
Thanks. Anybody else want to weigh in on
Sure,
that?
Barb, I'll address that question. That's an interesting question. I think the concern stems from what I've heard from some independents is they don't really have true ballot access in the primary election, or they think that the major party candidates don't court them enough during the primary election. And I'm not going to sit here and say whether those concerns are have merit or whether those concerns are actually correct under the law. But I would say, and Angel, I think, did a good job identifying some of the concerns that he has. The answer is to go in with a scalpel into the law and make those changes with precision. If the problem is that independents aren't engaged enough in the primary election, well, how do we get them engaged? Does that have to do something with early voting, the access to permanent or early voting lists? Does it have to do something with the signature gathering for candidates? Does it have to do something with something else? You don't go and make a major amendment to the Constitution of the state to upend the entire electoral system in order to get independents more engaged, because it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen where if you have independent candidates or third-party candidates, they don't have the critical mass of support that will get them past the primary election. So what you end up doing is you end up killing the chances of independent candidates and killing the chances of third-party candidates to get to the general election, where now they do have that direct access. They do have that right to get on the general election ballot. So I feel like, if there are these problems, they could be addressed in a more precise manner rather than just upending the entire process. And Luis, I believe, mentioned that the legislature will be charged with changing almost every single statute in Title 16 of the Arizona Revised Statutes. Well, what's to keep the legislature from, instead of having a percentage threshold, like 1% or 3%, from saying in a legislative district, each candidate needs to collect 2,000 signatures or 3,000 signatures or 5,000 signatures from registered voters, then how would that impact a Green Party candidate or Libertarian Party candidate's ability to even get on the primary ballot? If Barry comes to my door and says, "Hi, I'm a Libertarian, I want to run for Legislative District 7, as a major party candidate, I may not want him I may not want to sign his petition, because now I'm going to add him, I'm going to add Barry to the list of the more conservative side folks that I have to vote for. I'm going to say, okay, well, Barry's presence on the ballot is going to dilute my preferred candidate's ability to get on the ballot. So it's the unintended consequences, we could sit here and brainstorm them all day.
Thank you, Mike. Someone else?
Oh, great. I'm going to go right to the heart of it. And the proponents that are in support of Prop 121, who says this will help moderates, independents, they're liars. It's that simple. It's Louisiana-style politics. They've had it for over 30 years, of which in 30 years only one incumbent was knocked out of office. In California, it recently passed Prop 14 in 2010. What happened? Well, within 2 election cycles, third parties and independents will cease to exist. Not one political scientist in the United States agrees with the concept that this helps independence, that this opens the elections. In fact, it sterilizes political cleansing. In Washington State, when they passed Top 2 a couple of years ago, prior to Top 2, they had dozens of candidates running for office. Well, since passing Top 2 in Washington State, several, 3, 4 candidates Again, third parties and independents are ceasing to exist, that is, in Washington State. So here in Arizona, you have to look at the money behind Prop 121. In California, you have to look at the money behind Prop 14, over $5 million in California, again, from corporations tied into Charles Munger, the richest man in California, which is buddies with Warren Buffett. The proponents behind this are anything but pure. The voters need to come out and vote against Prop 121 because, number one, it limits voters' choice, Prop 121. Number two, it protects the incumbents. 3, it stifles competition. 4, confusing the voters. That's the best argument the proponents for Prop 121 in Arizona have, is confusing the voters on these little issues that it helps moderates look at the facts. On the little issues that it, something with nonpartisan, what are they talking about? Look at the facts from a national perspective. Again, it's the system, it's the corporate money, the interest money, the big people at the top, central banks, the Federal Reserve, who controls that, who are behind top 2. So that would be my answer to that question.
Thank you.
Thank
Does
you.
anybody else need to weigh in on that before I go on? Okay. Question number 2. The framers of this initiative, the authors, have talked a great deal about electing, and several of you have mentioned this already, so maybe I want to say, but have talked a great deal about electing more moderates in Arizona to bring civility to government, and that these people would then work better together, although moderation has not been defined. Again, if you have not already addressed this in your statement, do you think the premise of the initiative is valid? And if you do think it's a valid concern, what would you do to suggest that we address it and improve the situation that they talk about?
You know, they try to sell the point that they're trying to moderate the state, but they fail to recognize that when elections, especially in the primary, where you have very low voter turnout, and again, I'm going to go to the practical application of what happens on election. People who are motivated to vote in a primary have very unique special interests. They either are very passionate about certain issues. They are voting in a primary because they're a well-informed voter. They're usually more affluent. The DNA of a primary voter is unique. And what consultants and mail firms and TV commercial producers will try to segment this information, so that's why the cost goes skyrockets, is because they're going to try to segment this DNA so they could sell these special interests their candidate of choice. So very easily you're going to see a candidate that was only able to garner 20% of the primary vote, which gets the most votes in that primary. They advance to the general, and all of a sudden you have an etch-a-sketch moment that they will try to moderate their scenario and their platform to try to appeal that 50%, and it really creates a disingenuous form of politics, in my opinion. It really starts to give the voters less choice because of just the practical way that our campaigns are being run. And it has to do about money, and it has to do about how our voters are less informed. They're grabbing information not from the newspaper, but from sound bites and other issues. So, I mean, once again, I think we have to look at it will be less choices, more special interests, which will result into politicians that are only beholden to unique special interests that will be more extremist, in my opinion.
Thank you. Does anybody else want to weigh in on that one?
I just wanted to mention some of the proponents that I've talked to in this. It's really kind of disturbing because their motivation was a little different than what we're discussing. It was to get rid of Joe Arpaio or Russell Pierce or people that they really didn't like. That was their whole point. So it really is to squash out the little voice. And this kind of proposition will make that absolutely impossible to get any new ideas in. And as someone who was a student of the Soviet Union, I saw exactly what moderation did. Nothing. And that's why they collapsed. And that's where we're headed here is what I see it. I don't want to get all dramatic about us turning into the Soviet Union because they had it better than us, I think, in many ways. But realistically, this proposition in no case expands the dialogue or the conversation. And that's so important because as a candidate or former candidate myself, I know we steal ideas from other candidates that are popular. So if we have those other voices out there on the campaign trail, that's what happens. And we see it even, well, no, we don't see it in the presidential election. They're the same, so it doesn't matter. But in any event, we really have to work very hard in all of our ways that we can to influence the voters of Arizona to make sure this does not go through, or else they literally lose the elections in every case.
Thank you. Does anybody else want to weigh in on that, Anna?
No, it's not a valid argument. As Christina and I have already stated, similar legislation already exists in California, Louisiana, and Washington State. There's no evidence of a moderating influence. And also, as Christina has suggested, and I absolutely agree with her, that the authors of this initiative are either incredibly naive or they're absolutely lying to the voters here in Arizona. I tend to lean towards the latter. You know, they failed to realize that because of the U.S. Supreme Court decision, Citizens United v. FEC, that corporations may spend unlimited amounts of money on elections, either in support or in opposition to a particular candidate. It is the corporations and their lobbyists that write the legislation in Washington, D.C. and our state legislatures. In some circumstances, apparently our elected officials don't even read the legislation they're voting on. You know, prime example is the Patriot Act. The authors of this legislation have also failed to take into account the influence of organizations like the American Legislative Exchange Council, also known as ALEC, which produces pro-corporate model legislation for its members. And according to a recent broadcast on the PBS program Moyers and Company, titled United States of ALEC, which was broadcast on September 28th, at least 49 out of our 90 Arizona legislators are ALEC members. This initiative does nothing to address this conflict of interest.
Thank you. Can I go? Oh,
If I may briefly.
sure.
We definitely can all agree that this does not help moderates. In fact, it closes the elections. But I like to point a light out to those that, you know, for Prop 121 that are, you know, so for it, saying it'll help moderates. I would urge the people, and we hope with free and equal elections, we of course are big supporters of the Constitution. Top 2 is unconstitutional. I mean, by limiting the general election to only 2 candidates, voters who want to vote for someone else in the general election are disenfranchised. This is unconstitutional. But I'd like to shine a light at the end of the tunnel. I mean, Oregon, they defeated Top 2. If Oregon can do it, we will do it here in Arizona, defeating Prop 121. And the answer to it, Top 2 is not it. Closed primary is what it really is. In fact, they're lying when they say open primary. It's anything but an open primary is a closed primary. Why not introduce something like proportional representation? I mean, this is something that will help increase voter participation. And our sister company, Free and Equal Inc., we've gathered millions of signatures to get candidates on the ballot across the spectrum: Democrats, Republicans, Greens, Constitution Party, Socialist Equality Party, all of them not controlled by special interest money. These are the kind of initiatives we hope to support in the future. Once we squash Prop 121 here in Arizona and we stop it and put an end to it in California and Washington, and we transition towards opening the elections, opening the debates, getting rid of voter fraud, implementing proportional representation nationwide. I look forward to working with everyone here today to move in towards a brighter direction for America.
Thank you. I'd like to go on to question 3, but before I do, I would mention that defeat in Oregon came after a group of a new law they have there called the Citizens Initiative Review, which has 24 people totally examine one initiative for a whole week through very detailed analysis, and it was after their rejection of it that it failed in Oregon. So I thought that was interesting. 3, we constantly hear that this type of system works well for nonpartisan city elections and that we should simply extend its use statewide. How would you refute or challenge that statement?
Start. Well, I guess I see a couple problems with that. Number one is the nature of city governance has never really been political. It's always been nonpartisan. You have in Arizona, sometimes in cities, folks will kind of run loosely connected with a party label. But if you look at the recent City of Phoenix election, Mayor Stanton won overwhelmingly. And he's a registered Democrat against the candidate who was a registered Republican. Neither of them, they kind of, we all kind of knew which was which, but Greg Stanton had overwhelming Republican support. Well, maybe I wouldn't say overwhelming, but he had a solid amount of Republican support because the nature of running the city is a little bit more nonpartisan. Okay, second is this initiative doesn't wholly remove party politics from the mix. Anybody could run as any sort of party that they want to identify with. If I want to run as a Democrat on Hell's district, I could, as a conservative Republican, put the Democrat Party label on, or I could put the Green Party label on in his district and run against him in the primary. And that just works to confuse voters. It works to send the wrong message to voters, and it's deceptive. So the argument that this is just going to extend what's done in the city election scheme is a farce, because they haven't taken out the political element of it. And number two, you could never take away the partisan politics for statewide offices and the legislature.
Thank you. Just, Luis?
It's interesting. I don't know the clear this history, but actually nonpartisan elections in local government was a project of Barry Goldwater in Arizona in the late 1940s, and that got him elected to the city of Phoenix, because he was trying to get elected in an overwhelmingly Democratic state, and that he created in a group of businesses and corporate interests, companies and people were trying to get a better handle on local politics and take it away from the partisan. And so there's a unique history. Somebody has documented the article on that, and he was able to shift the partisan history of Arizona, which was overwhelmingly Democrat, and created a Republican majority in the state, which is a very unique history. But there is very little facts about the nonpartisan election and how successful that is in local government, because there's so low voter turnout. Any given city or municipality in the state sees voter turnout at 20 or 30% in their elections, and when they have such especially in the city, that it is very limited. And so if they're trying to make a success story using local government as an example, it's because, again, it's a very unique type of voter that is turning out, and they're able to segment how they get to that win number. And we have to understand, it doesn't translate. What we've seen is there's been efforts by groups to try to move local government to try to make them more partisan, and they've consolidated elections to be general election dates, like in November. All the city governments will have consolidated election dates in August and November, which has created more partisan. You've created the partisanship in the city of Scottsdale, for example, and races become very partisan just because of the coattails of the rhetoric that's going on. So it's a very unique, again, these are all ideas, and they're being tested, and they're being touted as examples when they themselves have not failed or been fully vetted, in my opinion.
Does anybody else? Christina?
Thank you. Well, you can generally identify where a candidate stands on the issue depending on which political party they represent, although all of our political parties, especially the Greens, we've been subject to carpetbaggers recently hijacking our battle line. But if we look at a couple examples, number one is the Phoenix City Council. There's no proof that, that all the council members are moderates or that they're going to work for the good of the city. One of the issues that's been somewhat divisive on the Phoenix City Council is the issue of municipal city employee pension reform. And you've had some members of the city council that are pro-labor and others that are anti-labor. Some members of this council are actually scapegoating the labor movement, saying that, well, they're the reason that our pension reform is in danger, or that we're putting the city taxpayer at risk. We also have the issue here in Phoenix of the citywide election redistricting that's taking place between District 7 and District 8. And that issue, where it's going to probably go before the Department of Justice, and did the city council make the correct decision? Was it a legal decision? Was it a constitutional decision, et cetera? We also can take the example of the Glendale City Council and their decisions in regards to the hockey team, the Coyotes. Is that decision being made in the best interest of Glendale residents, or are they making that decision on behalf of their corporate neighbor citizen, the Phoenix Coyotes? So there's no proof that moving to a nonpartisan elections at the statewide level is going to be any better for Arizona voters or Arizona citizens.
Thank you. Anybody else? And Barry, I think Barry.
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to mention that, you know, when they say it works well in these city and municipal elections, really, rather than accept that statement, we should ask them what their definition of working well is. If it's to limit the ability of the people to choose a different perspective, it's effective. If the idea is to squelch the political rhetoric, it's effective. If it's to make us a better country, it's a disaster. The whole idea that we can only handle 2. I mean, why not the top 5 or the top 10? In California, they had the top 159 or something when Schwarzenegger got in. We can handle it. I think this thing is an incredible insult to every voter who would even consider it, to take a look at a pre-primary, not a primary, but it really is a primary kind of a situation, just to get rid of individuals that they want. I think the greater issue would be one of transparency in the elections and to verify the vote. That's where the real problems are, because no matter what goes on in the voting booth, at the vote tally station, that's where the elections are won.
Thank you. Christina.
Sure. I couldn't agree with you more, Barry. Well said there. And I look at this question on nonpartisan. Obviously, it's not true. They're lying again, the proponents in support of 121. But from a national perspective in Washington State, you know, you have the Democratic Party and the Libertarian Party have united, filed suit against Top 2. And unfortunately, the Supreme Court wrongfully did not take that case. Well, the judicial system, as we know, are appointed by our elected officials, so our judicial system is flawed. We'll get to that in another panel discussion. But in California, the plaintiffs against Proposition 14 have now been fined over $243,000 for filing suit against Top 2. Shame on the judicial system. I can't wait to go there and help them after we hopefully defeat Prop 121 here. What Top 2 is the two-party system becoming one corporate America. In 2010, Free and Equal, Stop Top 2, we held a press conference uniting all 6 party chairs, state chairs, including Democrat, Republican, Peace and Freedom, Libertarian, Constitution, American Independent Party. All 6 parties came out against Proposition Top 2. Why? Well, from the Mr. Burton there and the Republican chair both informed me, Christina, we're losing control of our own political party. I'm sure that's something these gentlemen can agree with as well under Top 2. So the proponents that are favoring Prop 121, who are lying to the voters saying it opens in elections, they might as well say that the earth is flat because it is so dishonest. So the turnout's been low in all these states. I mean, the numbers are there. The political scientists, we could have had one here today. We have a full panel, a great panel, might I add, but not one political scientist agrees with any of these arguments for Top 2. So we must squash it, and we'll be traveling. I'll be traveling, connecting with everybody throughout the state, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Tucson, Flagstaff, and so on. So it's just the confusing. That's their best argument to confuse us, but we are waking up. The people are waking up.
Thank you. I'm going to take a couple questions from the audience, but before I do that, is there anybody up on the panel that has some burning statement that they still need to make? And how?
Yes, thank you. Well, I've thank everyone for being here this morning at this event. I'd like to encourage all members of, all voters here in Arizona, but especially all members of the Latino community and organized labor to carefully study this initiative. In my opinion, Proposition 121 is a terrible initiative and will do nothing to promote open government or open elections. It totally misses the boat when it comes to the corporate influence on our elections and our elected officials. There are other reforms that we can implement to improve our elections that Christina has already suggested, such as ranked choice voting and instant runoff voting, which allows voters to rank candidates by order of preference, proportional voting systems, which allows candidates from different political parties to be elected to legislative bodies proportionally, free media access for all ballot qualified candidates, and amending the U.S. Constitution to abolish corporate personhood. I would also add, as has been suggested by Barry and Christina, that we need to have our ballots hand counted. We need to do away with these electronic voting machines, which can be tampered with. They are not open source, and anybody can manipulate the elections in that manner. So I encourage everyone to please vote no on Proposition 121. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody in the audience have a question? Do we have a question?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, practically speaking, if we defeat this here in Arizona and we want to open it up more for independents, for instance, an independent going to a primary can request only one party ballot. Have you all given any thought to how we could open it up better for the independents without radical change?
Who would like to take that? Andy? He wants to know how to help the independents a little bit more. He's suggesting that right now they can only request one ballot in the primary, similar to the rest of us, though I would mention. So that was his question. Is there something more that we can do for independents?
Well, it's just what you said, Barbara. I mean, the primaries are meant for party members to be able to elect the candidates that they feel will best represent their interests and values in the general election. And it's not like we as Greens or Libertarians or Republicans or Democrats can go vote in someone else's primary, you know. And so I think that for independents and party not designated voters, it just comes down to a choice of which partisan primary they feel best represents their interests. The other option would be for independent and party not designated voters to form their own political party. What would be the platform of that independent party, I do not know, but there are, you know, you know, there's the Americans Elect, there are independent parties in other states. So, I mean, it really just comes down to a decision that what do independents and party not designated voters want here in Arizona. I mean, they are the second largest voting bloc here in the state of Arizona. They are even larger than the Democratic Party, okay? So it really just depends, and I know that independent and party not designated voters, they're all over the political spectrum, but it really just comes down to their own individual choice. What is it that they want? But voting and approving Proposition 121 will not benefit them, in my opinion, in any way, shape, or form.
Thank you. Luis, were you going to weigh in?
Yeah, just I think opening it up in the way that they are either sent the ballot or even they still have a distinction that they are a no-party independent voter, but the ability to register for a primary purpose, a permanent early ballot, or some sort of a designation that makes them easier to participate is certainly election reform that would create more participation of independents in the primary. Right now, the steps are a little bit complicated. If you are an early ballot, you have to, if you have signed up for an early ballot, the independent voter needs to contact the recorder's office to designate that preference in the primary, and there needs to be some sort of a facilitation to participate more in our primary election. But again, you know, primary voters are unique individuals, and it should be our goal to increase participation. But even in the general election, I'm just going to cite, in 2010, 40% of those registered as other and independents turned out. 55% of all Democrats turned out, and 65% of the Republicans turned out in 2010. Overall, statewide, it was 55% turnout. But I could tell you that the larger the number of individuals registered as no party, giving them that they really don't want to commit to anything, gives candidates very little information on how to target those voters, so they become less targeted, they receive less mail, less information, and so the voter participation of that group becomes less and less. And you could see that throughout democracies that have a larger independent vote, or even states that have seen the increase of independents, they have lower and lower voter turnout. I think there was a statistic in Arizona that listed Arizona either the 7th worst voter turnout states in the country. And I believe it's very correlated to the number of voters that have chosen not to be a part of a political party. And those are just the facts with numbers and participation that is out there. So,
Christina.
Yeah, I just wanted to add also that, as I stated earlier, if we really need the state legislature to amend the signature requirements for independent candidates. And I think that could also go a long way into helping to increase voter turnout amongst independent voters in the primary.
Christina.
Wow, great responses. Just to address your question directly, open primaries are good. Over 30 states have open primaries where the head of each political party advances from the primary to the general election. Hence is why top 2 is a closed primary. Over 60, 70 countries, maybe 80, have proportional representation. I don't know if there's a perfect form of proportional representation, but when we put that on the ballot starting in California, we'll make sure it's perfect, because we're going to listen to what the people want, for sure. And a national database at Free and Equal Elections, we're going to be launching a national database listing every single candidate running for office throughout the United States and shining a light on special interest money in that database. And well, what we're hearing from our supporters from the origins of the Constitution is that parties don't work. The Constitution doesn't even mention parties, and we do see a surge of independents, individuals running for office in 2014 to take back our government who don't support NDAA, the Patriot Act, SOPA, and so on. And finally, to open it up for independents, we've got to, of course, open up the debates, get more discussion out there so people know that there are more independents out there, hence the reason we're holding a presidential debate on October 23rd at the University Club of Chicago, where we have 4 presidential candidates confirmed from Libertarian, Green, Constitution, and the Justice Party. It'll be aired on Al Jazeera, live nationwide, linktv.org. Larry King may come in, YouTube as well, on the fence. So this is the first step of bringing together these candidates that have been choked, from Ron Paul, Ralph Nader, all these independents, by a system that doesn't really represent the people. And now we have top 2, which doesn't even represent the Democratic and Republican Party. How scary is that? They're going through the same thing that the independents and third parties have been going through for decades now, and it's not the right direction. So we need to unite together and inspire people to run for office. Of course, we'll be doing an instant runoff vote on that presidential debate and taking the top 2 candidates for the final debate in DC on the 30th. You can check that on our website at freeandequal.org. So thank you.
Thank you. Barry wanted to weigh in.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I think it's great that everybody, I'd love it if everybody was registered as independent and not in a party. But the problem with independence is, as Angel said, they're all over the board. You could be Pat Buchanan or Ralph Nader and end up in that same group. No one would know what you stood for. So there's really no way to bring it together for the independent party, as it were. What may be a better idea would be something that we could eliminate this clean elections nonsense with, would be to have a specific website where all candidates who qualified were displayed with video and everything, and be directing people to go to this one site all the time. That would be every candidate's, site up there. I think that would be a far better way to get people to participate, where they could all be up there, because the fools will make themselves known pretty quickly. And after all,
That's what we're doing.
We do need some humor.
Thank you.
Sometimes I provide it.
Thank you.
Awesome. Great. Same wavelength.
Okay. A recent letter to the Capital Times from the League of Women Voters said that reform may be needed, but not this one. And that while good government reform is like healthy vegetables, excuse me, top 2 is like enticing candy. Ultimately, it rots your teeth. While we hope that you consider a no vote on 121 after hearing from the panelists today, and may I mention panelists that vary a great deal in their different views on things, we hope you will vote no on 121. And the panelists will be around for another little piece of time here, maybe a half an hour, to answer any questions if you have them. And I would like to give them a big round of applause, if you can, for tackling this issue this morning. So thank you all.